Well, thank you. Can I start by thanking you, Gary, for your generosity in sharing with us your feelings and the background and speaking so openly, because it takes enormous generosity to do that. And to share out of your loss that something positive has to come. It's easy to say it mustn't happen again. Sadly, we know that it will happen again. Only last week we had questions in Parliament and the Lords on suicide prevention, and I asked a question about suicide contagion, because I think there is another problem there, which is that there can be a view sometimes that suicide must be the answer to the problem that you're facing, and it can become something, and I say this from my own sad experience amongst very, very close friends and colleagues, was that when one committed suicide, another one attempted suicide very shortly afterwards. It was a fluke, actually, that we found him, and it was a fluke that he survived. But there is that, and I do think there is something very difficult for doctors who are outside of London. And unashamedly, I'm not from London, but I do think in a small community where your kids may go to school, you may go for dinner with somebody, you know the people who you may be going to see socially, it is harder. You cannot find the anonymity. You may have to go to a different city to actually be able to talk openly to somebody when you feel that you're in trouble. I think there is another problem, which is in some ways worse for GPs in some practices, but it's as bad for doctors if they feel isolated in a specialty, and that is loneliness. I think medicine is very, very lonely, and we can feel as if we're expected to be the never empty bucket, as if we can soak up more and more and more and hear about people's problems and take them all on. We are never allowed to lose our temper. We are never allowed to lose our rag. We are never allowed to say, will you stop beating me up verbally? I can't cope with it anymore. We are not allowed to respond as we would like to the vexatious complaint. A vexatious complainant was the cause of a very dear friend of mine's suicide, because it got in the press and he was hung out to dry by the press locally in the area to which he devoted his whole life. So for me personally, this is actually quite close to the heart. I also think you hit on something, Gary, very important. When you spoke about Louise as being a doctor, those of us that have gone into medicine and loved it, we're like Brighton Rock. It's written through us. You know, cut a bit of me off, you'll see doctor in there somewhere. Any situation, I can't help it. My husband jokes, a road accident, I say, no, stop the car, got to go. Somebody lying on the pavement, I feel I have to go. This sense of duty, that sense of duty that means that you're never through it because the patients keep on coming through the door. The distress that you have to soak up keeps on coming through the door, and there is no end to it. And it's terribly easy to end up feeling that you somehow are personally responsible, particularly when you see things spiralling downhill, when perhaps you've missed a diagnosis. You can see with hindsight, you beat yourself up, you can see how you put it all together, and you didn't quite get it right, but you beat yourself up, but who do you go to? And there can be a real problem about letting your colleagues know just how vulnerable you feel. Fortunately, some groups and some teams are now recognising that doctors need headspace, that they need time out. You know, if you're an emergency department doctor and you have 3 deaths in one shift, and they're all young, they're accidents, they're all total disasters for all that family that you're dealing with there and then. And then what happens, you walking out and you see another blue light coming in, you know, and perhaps that's a cardiac arrest and you have to stop and go back. So I think in all parts of medicine it can be really hard, because it isn't like other jobs where there's an end to it. You don't close it down. Whatever you do, you prescribe drugs, medication. Don't want to use the word drugs because it has other connotations, but perhaps you start somebody on something and then at 10 o'clock at night and you worry, was that the right thing? Was the dose right? Are they okay? What do? Do you phone up the patient? Do you hope that they'll phone somebody if things aren't quite right? All those worries, and they corrode into your own life and your own ability. And if you're already finding it difficult to cope, it pulls you down a notch. So I think there are some real problems, and then there's the other problem of stigma. For the doctor to cross to the other side of the desk, to say, I'm not the one that's absorbing all the time, I'm the one that you need to absorb for a bit, I need a bit of support, can be incredibly difficult. And there is that stigmatisation, and I'm afraid in some communities there is gossip, and you'll find in a team, and you'll find others, and it's not just the doctors, it'll be some of the other healthcare professionals in a multi-professional team. They say, did you know doctors are off with depression or not coping? That word, not coping, we're being asked day in and day out to be superhuman. And then somebody can have the audacity to label us as somehow not coping at some point, when we haven't got a system that's providing us with inbuilt resilience. So one of the things that came up in the parliamentary questions was about case finding and about looking. And I think that we actually have a duty to our fellow professionals to have the courage to say, are you okay? Are you okay today? You don't look quite yourself. Do you want to have a cup of tea? Or when you hear that something awful's happened, or some nasty aggressive patients come in, or whatever, to say, do you want a cup of tea? Do you want to sit down 5 minutes, 3 minutes, quick debrief? Because otherwise that's going to corrode into somebody and work through them and build up. So my personal feeling and sort of commitment in a way to suicide prevention, if possible, and to helping doctors who have suicidal thoughts, and I defy anybody, actually, if they're honest, who hasn't at one point thought, actually, perhaps I should kill myself. Perhaps everyone would be better off without me. Your self-esteem can get so low that you can think it, even if it's only transiently, even if you pull yourself out of it quickly. But I believe that you're a robot if you haven't been there and have those kind of conflicting emotions in yourself. So there's something about actually saying, yes, we're human, we have feelings, and the problem locally, if you go to seek help officially, is that if you're in a community, you may find that you're then seeing somebody who is your trainee, your registrar, or whatever. It'll be the one that you didn't really like, perhaps. You know? And then they come out with the formulaic questions, and you think, I know which communication skills course you went on. And you want to say, no, you're not meant to ask it like that. That's not an open enough question. You know, what? And you sit there thinking, what's the point? Now, I've lowered myself even more. I'm now seeking help from somebody who I haven't actually professionally respected, which is why the anonymity of being able to seek help from people who really do know what they're doing is so important. But I think it's on all of our shoulders to actually do something. And the last thing I want to say, again, picking up from something you said, Gary, was you mentioned in passing, but for me it was the call that Louise listened. I think the most important skill that we have is to listen. It's old-fashioned history taking, but it's more than that, because you listen with your ears, you listen with your eyes, you listen with your nose, you know, the smell of somebody who's just been too low to not wash in the morning, that slight change, and then you listen with touch, and it's really important. And we get worried about just the hand out to our colleagues, just the hand, come and have a cup. And that's when you feel that they're trembling. You feel that their palms are a bit sweaty. You think, they are in trouble. So it was a huge privilege for me to be asked to speak tonight. I'm grateful to Alex, who's now sitting at the back, who came and approached me, and I think she'll agree. It was half a second before I said yes, because for me personally, this is just so terribly important. And if we don't look after our own, then I don't think we're worth anything, actually. Because we're like Brighton Rock, but let's look after the other bits of Brighton Rock too, and let's not have them broken and left shattered because they're trying to devote their lives to a population out there who, quite frankly, sometimes don't appreciate it at all, and hold them personally responsible for all the bills in the NHS, the world, and everything else, and beat us up verbally, because that's what happens. And if your resistance is low, it's really, really hard. So, in honour of Louise, I didn't know her. Many of you here did. For many of you, this is very personal. But this is such an important movement, and it's got to be part of a huge national conversation amongst ourselves professionally, so that we say, it's okay to say, I found that difficult, I'm not coping, I feel down, before that spiral starts to happen, if at all possible. As that spiral's happening before it goes even lower. And that we don't let our friends and colleagues down, as I personally think we let my own friend down, because none of us realised that he was so low that he was going to kill himself. So thank you, and again, thank you for your generosity.